One kingdom, 12 tribes, one throne built by David, glorified by Solomon, the envy of every nation on earth. And then, in a single afternoon, it shattered. How does a kingdom that touched the heights of glory collapse into two? Not through a foreign army, not through famine or plague, but through pride, broken promises, and a young king who refused to listen. Hidden in this story are two men most believers overlook. Jeroboam, the servant handed 10 tribes by a prophet's torn cloak, and Rehoboam, the heir who answered his people with a threat instead of mercy. One choice, one word spoken in arrogance, and Israel would never be whole again. What if the seeds of this division were planted long before Solomon ever died? What if God himself had already declared the kingdom would be torn? Before this story ends, you'll see how the crown of Israel was split in two, and why its echoes still warn us today. Stay close. This is the day the kingdom fell. There was a time when Israel shined brighter than any nation on earth. The throne sat in Jerusalem, and on that throne was Solomon, the son of David. He had asked God for one thing above gold and long life. He had asked for wisdom, and God gave it to him in a measure no man had ever known. People came from far away just to hear him speak. Kings sent gifts, traders filled the roads. Silver became so common in those days that no one even counted it. The land had rest on every side, and the people lived in peace under their own vines and fig trees. The Bible paints the picture for us in 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 20, where it says, "Judah and Israel were many, as the sand which is by the sea in multitude, eating and drinking and making merry." It was a golden hour, a nation full, fed, and safe. Solomon had also built something the world had never seen, a temple for the Lord, raised stone by stone over 7 long years. When it was finished, the glory of God filled it like a cloud. The whole nation gathered to worship, and it seemed nothing could ever shake what David's son had built. But here is the quiet truth at the heart of this story. The greatest danger to a kingdom is rarely an enemy outside the walls. Often, it begins inside the heart of the one who rules. And the heart of Solomon, wise as it was, would soon begin to drift. Solomon loved many women. That was where the trouble started. He did not just marry daughters of Israel. He gathered wives from the nations all around, from places God had told his people to stay away from. The reason for the warning was simple. God knew that foreign wives would bring foreign gods, and foreign gods would pull the heart away. And that is exactly what happened. Little by little, year by year, the wisest man on earth let his heart be turned. 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 4 tells us plainly, "For it came to pass, when Solomon was old, that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father." Picture it. The same king who once built a house for the one true God now built places of worship for Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and for Milcom and Chemosh, the gods of other nations. On the hills near Jerusalem, altars rose for idols of stone and wood. He did this to please his wives. He burned incense to gods that could not see, could not hear, and could not save. And the man who had once known God so closely now bowed where he never should have bowed. The drift had become a fall. God had not been far from Solomon. He had spoken to him, not once but twice. He had appeared to him and warned him plainly to follow him and keep his commands. So when Solomon turned away, it was not from ignorance. He knew, and that made it heavier. The Bible does not hide God's grief over this. 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 9 says, "And the Lord was angry with Solomon, because his heart was turned from the Lord God of Israel, which had appeared unto him twice." Think about what that means. The God who had given him wisdom, riches, peace, and a kingdom watched the king he had blessed walk straight into the very thing he had warned against. This was not a small slip. It was a broken covenant, a turning of the back on the one who had given everything. And God does not stay silent when a covenant is broken. He came to Solomon with words no king ever wants to hear. He told him that because of this, Because he had not kept the agreement and the laws he had been given, the kingdom would be torn from him. The crown that had passed from David to Solomon would not stay whole. A blade was already lifted over the throne of Israel. The only question now was how far it would cut and when. God's judgment was real, but so was his mercy. And the reason for that mercy was a name from the past: David. David had not been a perfect man, but his heart had stayed true to God all his days. He had loved the Lord, returned to him after his failures, and kept the covenant when it cost him dearly. And God remembered that. Long after David was gone, his faithfulness still spoke. So God softened the blow. He told Solomon the kingdom would be torn, but not yet, and not fully. 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 12 records his words: "Notwithstanding in thy days, I will not do it for David thy father's sake, but I will rend it out of the hand of thy son." And then he held something back. Verse 13 continues, "Howbeit I will not rend away all the kingdom, but will give one tribe to thy son for David my servant's sake, and for Jerusalem's sake, which I have chosen." So here is where the story stands. The kingdom would split. Most of it would be torn away, but one tribe would remain with the house of David. A small flame kept burning, not because Solomon had earned it, but because David had been faithful, and because God keeps his promises across the years. Now the story turns to a new face. While the throne in Jerusalem was beginning to crack from the inside, God was quietly raising up the man who would take much of it. His name was Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. He came from the tribe of Ephraim, from a town called Zeredah. His father had died, and he was raised by his mother, a widow. He was not born into power. He was a working man, but he was a man who stood out. He was strong, capable, and good at what he did. Solomon noticed him, and the king put this young man over an important job. 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 28 tells us, "And the man Jeroboam was a mighty man of valor. And Solomon, seeing that the young man was industrious, he made him ruler over all the charge of the house of Joseph." So an ordinary servant, a hard-working son of a widow, was lifted up and given charge over the labor of his people. He had no idea yet what God had planned for him. He was simply doing his work well. But God had his eye on Jeroboam. The unknown servant was about to meet a prophet on a lonely road and walk away, holding the future of 10 tribes in his hands. Notice how easily we pass over a moment like this. An unknown servant lifted out of the crowd, stepping into a story that will reshape a nation. Many hear the stories, but few ever learn what's hidden inside them. If your spirit is hungry right now, Echoes Daily opens the Bible the way you've always wanted. A daily story, the context and curiosities behind it, the people who actually lived it, and the meaning that meets you today. 25 in-depth book studies, a companion who walks your week. Find it in the first pinned comment below. Available for a limited time only. One day Jeroboam left Jerusalem and walked out into the open country. He was alone on the road, or so he thought. Coming toward him was a prophet named Ahijah, a man from Shiloh. And Ahijah was wearing a new cloak, fresh and whole. What happened next must have stopped Jeroboam where he stood. The prophet took hold of that new cloak and tore it. Not a small tear. He ripped it into 12 pieces right there in front of him. Then Ahijah spoke, and his words carried the weight of God. 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 31 says, "And he said to Jeroboam, Take thee 10 pieces, for thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, Behold, I will rend the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon, and will give 10 tribes to thee." 10 pieces, placed into the hands of a servant. Each torn piece was a tribe of Israel. The prophet was telling Jeroboam, in a way no one could mistake, that God was going to take 10 tribes from the house of Solomon and hand them to him. This was no rumor and no man's idea. It was the word of the Lord, spoken on a quiet road through a torn garment. The same kingdom God had said would be split was now being measured out, and most of it was being placed on the shoulders of Jeroboam. But God's word to Jeroboam came with more than a kingdom. It came with a promise and a condition. God was not handing him the throne to do as he pleased. He was offering him something far greater than 10 tribes, if only he would obey. God told him plainly what he was looking for. 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 38 holds the offer, "And it shall be, if thou wilt hearken unto all that I command thee, and wilt walk in my ways, and do that is right in my sight, to keep my statutes and my commandments as David my servant did, that I will be with thee, and build thee a sure house, as I built for David, and will give Israel unto thee." Read that again, because it is the hinge of Jeroboam's whole life. God promised to build him a sure house, a lasting family line, a dynasty that would not be taken away, on one condition. If he would walk in God's ways and keep his commands, the way David did, then God would be with him. It was the same offer once held out to the house of David, a throne that could last for generations. All Jeroboam had to do was stay faithful. The choice was placed in his hands, clear and simple. God had given him the kingdom. Now he was offering him a future. Everything depended on what Jeroboam would do with it. Word of these things did not stay hidden for long. Somehow Solomon learned what had been spoken, that this servant of his, this man he had promoted, was marked to take 10 tribes of the kingdom. And Solomon did what frightened kings often do. He tried to kill him. Jeroboam had to run. 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 40 tells us, "Solomon sought therefore to kill Jeroboam. And Jeroboam arose and fled into Egypt, unto Shishak king of Egypt, and was in Egypt until the death of Solomon." So the man who had just been promised a kingdom now became a fugitive, fleeing for his life across the desert into the land of Egypt. There a king named Shishak gave him shelter, and there Jeroboam waited. He did not seize the throne. He did not raise an army. He simply waited far from home, while the promise hung in the air over the land he had left behind. The cloak had been torn, the 10 tribes had been spoken over him, but the time had not yet come. And so the seeds were planted. A king whose heart had wandered, a judgment spoken from God's own mouth, a mercy held back for David's sake, and a servant in exile, carrying a prophet's words and waiting for the day they would come true. The ground was set. All it would take now was the death of one king, and the kingdom would begin to tear. The day finally came that the prophet's words had been waiting for. After 40 years on the throne, the old king closed his eyes for the last time. The long reign was over. The Bible marks the moment quietly, as it often marks the end of great men. 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 43 says, "And Solomon slept with his fathers, and was buried in the city of David his father, and Rehoboam his son reigned in his stead." He was laid to rest in the city of David, the same city where his father had ruled before him. And just like that, the man whose name had filled the whole earth was gone. The wisest king the world had known was now only a memory carved into a tomb. But a throne does not stay empty. The moment one king is buried, the eyes of a nation turn to the next. And the next in line was his son, a young man named Rehoboam, who had grown up inside the palace, surrounded by riches, far from the worries of ordinary men. He had inherited the crown. But a crown is heavier than it looks, and Rehoboam was about to learn that ruling a nation takes more than being born to it. The people were waiting, and they had something to say. A new king needs the people to accept him. It was not enough for Rehoboam to simply sit on his father's throne in Jerusalem. The nation had to come together and make him king. So a meeting was called, not in the capital, but in a place to the north called Shechem. That choice already told a story. Shechem was deep in the territory of the northern tribes, far from the comfort of Jerusalem. And all Israel traveled there to do one thing. 1 Kings chapter 12 verse 1 says it simply, "And Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel were come to Shechem to make him king." So the young king left his palace and went to them. The whole nation gathered in one place, waiting to see what kind of ruler this son of Solomon would be. This was the moment the crown would be settled on his head, and the tribes would pledge themselves to him. It should have been a day of unity, a new king, an old kingdom, a fresh start. But under the surface, something was simmering. The people had carried a heavy weight for many years, and they had not forgotten it. They were not coming only to crown a king, they were coming to ask him something, and how he answered would decide everything. There was a man who had been watching all of this from far away. While Rehoboam prepared to take the throne, a name from the past stirred again. The servant who had fled to Egypt to escape Solomon's anger heard that the old king was finally dead. And so he came home. 1 Kings chapter 12 verse 2 tells us, "And it came to pass, when Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who was yet in Egypt, heard of it, for he was fled from the presence of King Solomon, and Jeroboam dwelt in Egypt, that he returned out of Egypt." The man who had waited so long in a foreign land now crossed back over the border into Israel. The exile was over, and when the people gathered, they did not forget him. They sent for him, and he came and stood among them. Now look at who stood on that day. On one side was Rehoboam, the son of the king raised in the palace. On the other side was Jeroboam, the son of a widow, returned from exile, standing with the people as their voice. Two very different men, brought to the same place at the same hour. The people did not face the new king alone. They had someone to speak for them, and together they would carry their request to Rehoboam. The people came with a real grievance, and they did not hide it. For years they had labored hard. The building projects, the heavy taxes, the forced work, it had worn them down. Now, with a new king before them, they saw a chance for relief. So they spoke plainly, with Jeroboam at their head. 1 Kings chapter 12 verse 4 records their words, "Thy father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore make thou the grievous service of thy father, and his heavy yoke which he put upon us, lighter, and we will serve thee." It was a fair and honest request. They were not rebelling. They were not making threats. They were simply asking the new king to lighten the load that the old king had laid on their backs. "Ease the burden," they said, "and we will serve you gladly." Notice the promise hidden inside their words. "We will serve thee." They were offering their loyalty. All Rehoboam had to do was show them a little mercy, and the whole nation would be his. Rehoboam did not answer right away. He told them to go away and come back in 3 days. He needed time to think, and in those 3 days the young king would seek advice, and the advice he chose would shape the rest of the story. Rehoboam had men around him who had served his father for many years. These were the old men, the experienced ones, the advisors who had stood in Solomon's court and watched a kingdom be governed up close. They knew how power worked. They knew the people. So the king asked them first. Their answer was wise, and it was gentle. 1 Kings chapter 12 verse 7 holds their counsel, "And they spake unto him, saying, If thou wilt be a servant unto this people this day, and wilt serve them, and answer them, and speak good words to them, then they will be thy servants forever." Read what they were really saying. They told the young king that the way to be served was first to serve. Speak kindly to the people. Give them good words. Show them you care about their burden. Do that, and you will not lose them for a day. You will keep them forever. It was the truth, plain and simple. A king who bends low to help his people earns a loyalty that lasts. The old men had seen enough years to know that gentleness was not weakness. It was strength. They handed Rehoboam the key to his whole reign. All he had to do was take it. But the young king was not finished asking. There were other voices in the room, younger voices, and he wanted to hear them too. Rehoboam turned away from the old men's advice and went to a different group. These were the young men he had grown up with, the friends of his own age who had been raised alongside him in the palace. They had never governed a nation. They had never carried the burdens the people carried. but they were the ones he trusted. He asked them the same question, and their answer could not have been more different. 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 10 and 11, give their words. And the young men that were grown up with him spake unto him, saying, Thus shalt thou speak unto this people that spake unto thee, saying, Thy father did make our yoke heavy, but make thou it lighter unto us. Thus shalt thou say unto them, My little finger shall be thicker than my father's loins. And now, whereas my father did lade you with a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father hath chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. It was pride dressed up as strength. They told him not to bend, but to boast, not to ease the people's load, but to crush them harder. Show them who is master, they said. Make your father's harshness look gentle by comparison. 2 roads now lay before Rehoboam. The old men offered mercy that would win a nation. The young men offered force that would break one, and the young king had to choose which voice to follow. The 3 days passed. The people returned, just as Rehoboam had told them to, hoping to hear that their burden would be lifted. Jeroboam came with them. The whole nation stood before the king, waiting for his word, and Rehoboam made his choice. He turned his back on the old men and their gentle wisdom, and he spoke the harsh words of his young friends instead. 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 13 and 14 tell us, And the king answered the people roughly, and forsook the old men's counsel that they gave him, and spake to them after the counsel of the young men, saying, My father made your yoke heavy, and I will add to your yoke. My father also chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. There it was. No mercy, no kind words, no relief. The new king looked at a tired and hopeful people and promised them only a heavier load and a sharper whip. He thought he was showing strength. He thought fear would hold the nation together. But in that single rough answer, Rehoboam threw away everything the old men had promised him. The loyalty of the people, offered freely just days before, was gone in an instant. The words were spoken. They could not be taken back, and the people had heard enough. The people did not beg again. They did not bow their heads and accept it. When they heard the king's cruel answer, something broke loose that had been holding for years. And there was a reason it broke exactly the way it did, for this was God's own doing, the turning that he had spoken of long before through his prophet. The people answered the king with words that tore the kingdom in two. 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 16 records the cry, So when all Israel saw that the king hearkened not unto them, the people answered the king, saying, What portion have we in David? Neither have we inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Now see to thine own house, David. So Israel departed unto their tents. In that moment, the 10 northern tribes walked away from the house of David. They were finished with Rehoboam. They were finished with Jerusalem's rule. They turned their backs and went home, and they would never again kneel before a son of David as one nation. Rehoboam, still not understanding what he had done, sent out a man named Adoram, the officer in charge of the forced labor, the very thing the people hated most. It was a fatal mistake. The people stoned Adoram to death on the spot. And Rehoboam, seeing the fury he had unleashed, scrambled into his chariot and fled for his life back to Jerusalem. The crown that had ruled 12 tribes now held only a few. The 10 tribes of the north had broken away, and they turned to the man who had stood among them. The kingdom built by David and glorified by Solomon was split in two, and there was no putting it back together. Back in Jerusalem, Rehoboam was not ready to let the 10 tribes go. He had lost most of his kingdom in a single day, and his pride burned. So he did what a king does when he wants something back by force. He gathered an army, a huge one, thousands upon thousands of fighting men, to march north and crush the rebellion. But God stopped him before the first sword was drawn. A man of God named Shemaiah came with a word that no king could argue with. 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 24, carries it, "Thus saith the Lord, ye shall not go up, nor fight against your brethren the children of Israel. Return every man to his house, for this thing is from me." They hearkened therefore to the word of the Lord, and returned to depart, according to the word of the Lord. Stop and feel the weight of those 4 words. This thing is from me. The splitting of the kingdom was not an accident. It was not only the fault of a foolish king. It was God's own hand at work, doing exactly what he had promised to do. And to Rehoboam's credit, this time, he listened. The army that had been ready to spill the blood of their own brothers turned around and went home. There would be no war that day. The 2 kingdoms would stand apart, just as God had said. Now turn to the north, where the man who had waited so long was finally a king. Jeroboam had the 10 tribes. He began to build and strengthen his cities, making himself secure in the land. But inside the new king's heart, a fear was growing, a fear that would poison everything. The problem was the temple. The house of God still stood in Jerusalem, in the land of the rival king. And the law said the people must go there to worship and offer their sacrifices. Jeroboam looked at that and saw danger. 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 26 and 27 open his thoughts to us. And Jeroboam said in his heart, "Now shall the kingdom return to the house of David. If this people go up to do sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then shall the heart of this people turn again unto their Lord, even unto Rehoboam king of Judah, and they shall kill me, and go again to Rehoboam king of Judah." There it is, laid bare. He was afraid that if his people kept walking south to worship, their hearts would slowly drift back to the house of David, and he would lose them and lose his life. He had been handed a kingdom by God himself, with a promise of a lasting house if he stayed faithful. But instead of trusting that promise, he trusted his fear, and fear was about to lead him into a terrible sin. Jeroboam made a plan to keep his people from ever going to Jerusalem again. If they would not travel south to worship, they could not be pulled back to Rehoboam. So he gave them something to worship right there at home. And what he made would stain his name forever. He took counsel, and then he acted. 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 28 tells the dark turn. Whereupon the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold, and said unto them, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. 2 calves of gold. He set one in a city called Bethel, in the south of his kingdom, and the other far to the north, in a city called Dan. Now no matter where his people lived, there was a golden idol close by." And listen to the lie he told them. He pointed to lumps of shaped metal and said, "Behold thy gods." He took the credit that belonged to the living God and handed it to 2 statues that had done nothing and could do nothing. It was easier, he told them. No long journey, no trip to Jerusalem, just bow here close to home. And so the king, who had been given everything, led an entire nation to bend the knee to gold. The 2 calves were only the beginning. Jeroboam did not stop at making false gods. He built a whole false religion around them, a copy of the real worship of Israel, twisted just enough to keep his people away from Jerusalem for good. The Bible lists what he did, piece by piece. 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 31 and 32 lay it out, "And he made an house of high places, and made priests of the lowest of the people, which were not of the sons of Levi. And Jeroboam ordained a feast in the 8th month, on the 15th day of the month, like unto the feast that is in Judah, and he offered upon the altar. So did he in Bethel, sacrificing unto the calves that he had made. And he placed in Bethel the priests of the high places which he had made." Look at how complete the counterfeit was. He built places of worship on the high hills. He made priests out of ordinary men who had no right to the office, men who were not from the tribe of Levi, as God had commanded. He even invented his own holy feast, set in his own chosen month, made to look like the real one in Judah. It was religion with the shape of the truth, but none of its heart. Everything looked almost right, and that was the danger. Jeroboam had built his people a beautiful lie, and he sat them down inside it. While Jeroboam stood at his altar in Bethel, ready to burn his false offering, God sent a messenger to confront him. A man of God came all the way from Judah, carrying a word straight from the Lord, and he cried out against that altar in front of everyone. He did not speak to the king. He spoke to the altar itself, and what he said reached far into the future. 1 Kings chapter 13 verse 2 holds the prophecy, and he cried against the altar in the word of the Lord and said, O altar, altar, thus saith the Lord, Behold, a child shall be born unto the house of David, Josiah by name. And upon thee shall he offer the priests of the high places that burn incense upon thee, and men's bones shall be burnt upon thee. A child not yet born was named out loud, Josiah, a king who would one day come and tear this very altar down. And then the man of God gave them a sign to prove his words were true. He said the altar would split apart and the ashes would pour out. And as he spoke, it happened. The altar cracked open and the ashes spilled to the ground, exactly as he had said. The God of Israel had spoken in Bethel, in the heart of Jeroboam's false kingdom. And he had aimed his words straight at the king's proudest work. Jeroboam heard the man of God cry out against his altar, and the king was furious. No one shamed him at his own altar in front of his own people, so he reached out his hand to have the man seized and dragged away. It was the act of a king who thought he was above the word of God. But his hand never reached the prophet. 1 Kings chapter 13 verse 4 tells what happened, and it came to pass, when King Jeroboam heard the saying of the man of God, which had cried against the altar in Bethel, that he put forth his hand from the altar, saying, Lay hold on him. And his hand, which he put forth against him, dried up, so that he could not pull it in again to him. His own hand froze, stiff and withered, stretched out and useless. He could not even pull it back to himself. The mighty king was suddenly helpless, his arm hanging dead in the air for everyone to see. The proud king became a begging king in an instant. He pleaded with the man of God to pray for him, to ask the Lord to make his hand whole again. And the man of God prayed, and God was merciful, and the king's hand was restored just as it had been before. But even after his hand was healed, even after seeing the power of God up close, Jeroboam did not turn back. His heart stayed hard. Time passed, and trouble came to the king's own family. Jeroboam's son, a boy named Abijah, fell sick. The king was desperate, so he sent his wife in disguise to the old prophet who had once told him he would be king. The prophet who had spoken over him long ago, hoping to hear that the boy would live. But the word she carried home was the opposite of hope. The prophet, though his eyes were dim with age, knew her at once, for God had told him she was coming. And God gave him a heavy word about the king's whole house. 1 Kings chapter 14 verse 10 declares it, Therefore, behold, I will bring evil upon the house of Jeroboam, and will cut off from Jeroboam him that pisseth against the wall, and him that is shut up and left in Israel, and will take away the remnant of the house of Jeroboam, as a man taketh away dung, till it be all gone. It was the end of his family line. The lasting house God had once offered him, the dynasty that could have stood like David's, was now condemned to be wiped away completely. And the prophet told the queen that the very moment she stepped back into her city, her child would die. It happened just as God said. As she crossed the doorway of her home, the boy breathed his last. All Israel mourned him and buried him, exactly as the word had promised. The two kingdoms never made peace. From the day they split, the house of Judah in the south and the house of Israel in the north stood against each other. 1 Kings chapter 14 verse 30 says it in a single line, And there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam all their days. And there was more trouble for the south. The king of Egypt, Shishak, came up against Jerusalem in the 5th year of Rehoboam's reign. 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 26 records the loss. And he took away the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house. He even took away all, and he took away all the shields of gold which Solomon had made. The gold that had filled the temple in the days of glory was carried off to Egypt. The golden shields were gone, and Rehoboam replaced them with shields of bronze, a poor copy of what had been lost, a fitting picture of how far the kingdom had fallen. In time, both kings came to their end. Rehoboam died and was buried in the city of David, and his son reigned after him in the south. In the north, Jeroboam died too, and his story closed under the shadow of the judgment God had spoken against him. 2 thrones, 2 kings, 1 nation broken in half and never made whole again. The kingdom that David had built and Solomon had raised to glory was now 2 kingdoms, walking 2 separate roads, and the days that followed would be written in the choices of the kings who came after them. If this story spoke to you today, don't let it end here. Take a moment right now and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story we bring to life from the pages of Scripture. There is so much more ahead, more kings, more prophets, more moments where God moves in ways no one expected. And if these words touched your heart, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. You never know who might be waiting for exactly this story today. A single share can carry God's truth into a home you may never see. Thank you for walking through this story with us. Until the next one, may you stay faithful, stay close to Him, and never stop listening for His voice.